I need to share with you today a great irony in our day and age. We all know that in education there's too much testing, right? Everybody talks about it. Testing is being dumped on teachers left and right, especially in the US. Have you heard about this? Are you experiencing it? It's so true, and it's overdone, and it is killing us. And yet, the irony is, with all that testing, we're missing out as reading teachers on the most important tests we could give our kids. And that's what I want to talk about tonight here at Reading Simplified. I'm Dr. Marnie Ginsberg, and I want to share with you the number one test you need to give any beginning reader or any struggling reader to find out if they have a problem or what problem they have, and to most likely zero in on the solution. Okay, so what happens most of the time with second graders, third graders, all the way up seventh graders, eighth graders, high schoolers? At the end of the year, we get an end of grade assessment, and it's a comprehension test. And if our kids don't score on grade level, or they don't get a 4, or they don't reach a certain percentile, or they don't get a 3, then we say that they have a comprehension problem. They're not comprehending on grade level. And true enough, they are not able to reach that standard. But is it because they have poor comprehension, poor reasoning of how to think about text, or is there something else going on? And how would you know? Because frankly, all you get is a level, how they compare with other kids their age. So it doesn't really tell you what the root of the problem is. And in reading, most of the time, the problem is not primarily comprehension. They may definitely need to be enhanced in their comprehension, and that may need to be a secondary or a tertiary thing to focus on. But most of the time, that's not the real problem. So the testing reveals a lacking, but it doesn't reveal the true nature of the problem. It's like a doctor who is given just one measure. The doctor who's given the information of the patient's temperature. So the doctor knows, oh, this patient has a fever. Well, just because the patient has a fever doesn't mean that the doctor knows what the diagnosis should be, right? It could be an ear infection. It could be strep throat. It could be some advanced autoimmune disease. It could be probably many other things that I don't know enough about to guess on, right? So that is the same thing as a comprehension test. Yes, there's a problem. The patient has a fever. Yes, there's a problem. The student can't read on grade level. But what is the source of the problem? Is the fever because of some sort of virus? Is it because of a bacteria? What do we do because of that fever? We got to get more testing. And so even though we're being bombarded by testing, ironically, we're not choosing the test that's probably going to give us the most valuable information. So when we know that a student's reading below grade level, we don't know the source of the problem. There's so many things that could be wrong. They could have a fluency problem. They could have a background knowledge vocabulary problem. They could have a word identification problem. They could have, more specifically, a sound-based decoding problem. They could have a language problem that is more related to comprehension, and then there could be other things that could be going on. So when we give the global measure of comprehension test, we don't know what the real root of the problem is. And so I see I see students all the time whose teachers think that they have a comprehension problem, and the parents think they have a comprehension problem too, because they get the test and it says comprehension not at grade level. But really, that's rarely the main thing. So the main thing for most students, after working with kids for 20 years, I see this over and over again. It's 99% of the time true that when kids are behind in reading, they have poor sound-based decoding, because that is the foundation for building up the ability to read well. And when those kids have poor sound-based decoding, Their word identification can be a little sluggish, maybe not quite as accurate as they could be. And then the next level of problems beyond that would be then maybe their fluency is a little slower and a little sluggish than it should be. So you build up all these kind of challenges that after that foundation is weak or crumbly. And by the time they get up to the higher level skill of comprehension with all these things that are weak and crumbly, yes, they have a problem with comprehension, but it could be that it's not the real main thing that we need to focus on. But if we go to the root of the problem and focus on what's the true problem, then we can make a big difference for our kids. To determine if a student has weak sound-based decoding, we should give the student a word attack test, also known as a nonsense word test or a non-word test. Have you seen those before? Have you given them yourself? They're not a full measure of what reading consists of. Obviously, they're not real words. And yet, when we give that nonsense word reading measure, we can deduce how poor or strong the foundation is of reading, which is truly sound-based decoding. So let me dive into these case studies, all right? So the first one is actually a story of enrichment. So this young girl was not struggling. She's a fourth grader, and look at that test. If you can read it, it says 8th grade for passage comprehension and 7th grade, 4th month for another passage comprehension test. So I happened to give her two. One was like a whole passage, and then the Woodcock-Johnson was just short sentences, like a closed test. So what was interesting was that those are the two tests I gave. She also had at school the MAP test, and she scored at the 86th percentile for that. But her mother wanted her to do better, and her mother also realized that her spelling and her writing were weak and that her attention was weak. And the teacher actually thought that in class, when the student was being asked different things about what they were doing, that the student showed poor comprehension. So something was off with this child, even though she was a fourth grade girl functioning way above grade level in her comprehension. But notice how impressive it was that she was comprehending up here, but her word identification was like a fourth grader. So she was actually just a couple months below her age for word identification. And then I also gave her the spelling test, and that one is pretty commensurate with her word identification, which is very common. But here was the red flag, and this is why I chose this as a case study. Guess what her word attack was? Here's a child who's in fourth grade, able to comprehend like a 7th or 8th grader, but still kind of scattered in class, and something seems to be off with literacy. This fourth grade girl who could comprehend like an 8th grader was at the 2nd grade level for word attack. I don't know how she had survived school with so many holes in her system. And so no wonder she was sometimes scattered. No wonder her spelling and her writing were not what her parents thought were her potential. And no wonder her teacher was confused that she had an 86th percentile for the MAP test, which is a comprehension measure, but things weren't quite happening well for her in class. This is so classic. She had been masking her poor word identification and poor word attack because she has incredible reasoning abilities, and she was compensating, but it was a struggle. Okay, so what we did was classic reading simplified with this fourth grade girl. I met with her about every other week for 6 weeks for an hour initially. And I did classic reading simplified activities like switch it, a little bit of read it, and then a lot of sort it. And then she read really challenging text, but I coached her on how to help her read it. So I made sure she blended as she read and learned the phonics information, which she had a big gap there. You don't come up with a 2nd grade word attack as a middle to end of the year 4th grader and not have some pretty weak phonics knowledge. Okay, so guess what happens when you just give a student fill in the cracks of the sound-based decoding foundation? Here she is, 4th grade girl with this 2.0 word attack, but we worked together for 6 weeks. Remember, it's an enrichment case. Her mom's concerned, but this is not a dire situation. So after 6 hours, I give her a test to see, baby, we don't need to work anymore. And her passage comprehension goes up. Remember, it was already pretty dang high, 7.4 for the Woodcock-Johnson, and it went up 1.1 grade level after those 6 hours. And it went up 1.8 grade levels for the word attack. So it was up to grade level after just 6 hours, because that was something that was really missing for her. And Reading Simplified Activities really targeted it precisely. If you could get a kid who is 2 or 3 years behind in word attack up to years in a couple of weeks or several weeks, is about 2 months, would that be a game changer for that kid? And it was probably a game changer for the classroom teacher, because the child wasn't so scatterbrained. And we got a lot better reports back from the classroom environment after that. And the student became more interested in writing, and the student's writing became better. Everything was more in the flow after that, because we realized that there was a big hole, gaping hole there for her in her sound-based decoding. And it was the nonsense word test that revealed it. Giving the word attack test can be life-changing for anyone who's struggling, and it's also still important for those kids who are in K, first and second, or year 1, year 2, or year 3. It's important for them because they can be clipping along just fine, memorizing high-frequency words, and if the foundation's not strong, it's masked. It can be masked for quite a while. Usually students come to me in 3rd grade or 4th grade because that foundation was cracked and they can't keep memorizing those words. So I encourage you to consider giving this test or some variation on the tests that are available here at this blog post, and see what you'll find. And if you've got kids with low nonsense word reading, low word attack, then zero in on that. Focus on teaching them sound-based decoding and activities like switch it, read it, and sort it. Reading challenging texts with the teacher's support, and then rereading will change that dynamic rapidly. Some kids, on average, I get kids with this profile of low word attack, I get them to grade level, actually beyond grade level, in about 12 hours of instruction on average. Of course, some kids with some more significant learning differences will take longer, but we are not talking about something where kids cannot move for years. These students, when you find out this is their profile, they can move pretty quickly if you find these activities like switch it and sort it particularly.